Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and today we are connecting with Vital for Colorado. Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of the Board of Directors of Vital for Colorado, is here. So glad to have you back.
Well, thanks a lot, Tammy. This real highlight of my week, and what a beautiful day. Nice to end it with you and our guests.
Yes, so we love having you on every it's almost every 2 weeks. It's the first and third Friday of the month. So when you want to tune in for Vital for Colorado, that's when you look for them. And it's great to be able to talk with so many of the people involved on your board of directors, for one thing, and also their commitment to energy in the state of Colorado.
Well, just real quick plug for Vital for Colorado. We're a nonprofit group started in 2013. We're run by a 15-person board of directors, and we're organized around a pledge. And we're very proud that over the course of 3 years, we've had just over 73,000 Colorado citizens and 1,000 businesses sign our pledge. Mm-hmm. And we try to be the rational voice of business. We try to talk about rational energy policy, and today we're going to talk to two very good folks who are going to be talking about the theme of limitations on growth by government fiat. Really is probably the best way to put it. But we have Chris Brown, who's the new Director of Policy Research for the Common Sense Policy Roundtable, which is a nonprofit also here in Colorado.
That's
Chris,
right.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, fantastic to be here.
And we also have Ty Adams, who's the President and CEO of the Colorado Association of REALTORS. And every time you see one of the realtor signs, this guy is the boss.
I don't know if I'm the boss, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming, Ty.
Uh-huh.
I think that we'd like to sort of introduce the two of you and really the Common Sense Policy Roundtable. That probably needs a little bit more introduction than other folks. But why don't you tell us a little about your background and what brought you to the Common Sense Policy Roundtable, and what do you do?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks, Tammy. Pleasure to be here. So I started with Common Sense Policy Roundtable as a full-time staff about a month ago, so just getting into the swing of this. But for the last 10 years, almost 10 years, I've worked with an organization, a private company called REME, that is one of the national leaders, the national leader, somewhat biased, but the national leader in dynamic regional macroeconomic modeling. So it's a very small niche, but nonetheless an important role that over the last, I think, 5 years, I've worked in that capacity with REME, with Common Sense Policy Roundtable, as they have been a license holder of a dynamic simulation model, several dynamic simulation models of the Colorado economy. And so had a unique opportunity to come and now work directly for the organization to sort of continue the mission. Again, Common Sense Policy Roundtable is, as you mentioned, a 501c3 nonprofit, non-advocacy organization that was founded by a group of business leaders, civic leaders within the state of Colorado that wanted to really provide insight and macroeconomic insight into policy changes. This is an effort and a type of evaluation of policy that several states have taken on, but Colorado is one state that, when developing evaluation of state legislation and policy changes, does not get into dynamic modeling. So they wanted to have the ability to have an evaluation and what policy changes meant for the overall well-being. So Common Sense Policy Roundtable is a free enterprise think tank. So we stand for the promotion and protection of the Colorado economy and free enterprises that are owned by Colorado citizens, employ Colorado citizens, and so we believe that free enterprise is the foundation of our economic prosperity and so we take on critical policy issues and provide a insight into the ramifications.
Well, yeah, I think you're being a little bit modest about the impact of the REME model for economic development, or some of the folks called eco-devo type people. It probably is the leading dynamic modeling, and it's been very important in Colorado for, I'd say, at least 5, 6, or 7 years, and many studies that we've talked about and looked at and focused on have been so-called REME-based studies. So it makes a lot of sense, and to bring somebody who's from REME and in Amherst and to run the program. And Ty, a little bit about your background, and tell us a little bit about the Colorado Association of REALTORs.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being here, first
Sure.
of all. I've been with the association now, the Realtor Association, for 24 years. I've been in the president CEO role now for about 3 years.
Okay.
And the Colorado Association of Realtors, primarily, our primary function is to protect homeownership. It's protecting private property rights. It's about making our members more successful. Not a lot of people, when we're working on this, understand the difference between just a real estate licensee and a realtor. We're a volunteer membership organization. So when you get your real estate license, you get to choose whether or not you want to become a realtor or not. So we have 3 levels. We have the local, we have the state, and we have the National Association of Realtors. And with all 3 of us, we feel like we're the most influential, powerful real estate organization that's promoting and advocating for homeownership.
Mm-hmm. Well, during the next segment, we'll tie this together and explain why realtors and economists from REME and Vital for Colorado were talking about building gated cities.
Yeah.
You're listening to Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. Today we are connecting with Vital for Colorado, and we're so glad to have Peter Moore kind of at the helm with me today. So just give us a little synopsis of what we'll talk about in the next segment. We've got a few seconds left here.
Well, during the next segment, we'll really talk about the partnership that houses the REME model here in Colorado, who's part of it, and then we'll talk about a report that just came out, authored by Chris, last week Tuesday.
Perfect. A lot of great information coming up. Stay with us on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. Thanks again for staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. Today we're connecting with Vital for Colorado. We're glad to have Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado's Board of Directors here.
Well, thanks a lot, Tammy. And we'll be talking, I guess, about a report that's been very recently issued by the REME Partnership. But before we do that, Ty, we probably should spend a moment or two and talk about the REME Partnership. What is the REME Partnership?
Well, the REME Partnership consists of 4 groups. The Common Sense Policy Roundtable, which Chris just talked about, Colorado Concern, Denver South Economic Development Partnership, and then ourselves. And when they came to us and approached us with this idea, we were just ecstatic, because one of the things we look for in coalitions is someone or organizations that have shared values, advocacy efforts, and then who wants to strengthen Colorado communities and Colorado overall. And I think that this partnership is one of those things that will help us do that.
It's a great collaboration between 4 pretty powerful groups, 2 of which I can think have been around for an awful long time in Colorado.
Yes.
And I think of this partnership as sort of housing the REME model, which is a licensed economic dynamic modeling system. And Chris, you come from REME and you wrote a new report. Which tell us about your new report that was issued last Tuesday.
Yeah, sure thing. So I want to say that the partnership really is not just about the organization. It's also about, there's a lot of support within the various organizations that led to the formulation and the insights within this report as well. So I do want to sort of point out some of the staff efforts and the other organizations that supported this. But this was an issue as I came on board with Common Sense Policy Roundtable and working with this partnership that was front and center as an issue confronting the Colorado economy. There's a specific initiative within the city of Lakewood to cap the annual number of residential permits that are given every year to no more than 1% of the previous year's total number of housing units. And so the fundamental question that was asked through this partnership that I led the research that's within this report is, what are the economic consequences, economic ramifications of this type of initiative, this type of effort to restrict growth through reducing the amount of residential housing growth. And so, just a little bit of background, the city itself has about roughly 67,000 households or housing units, and a population of about 150,000 roughly. And we started by looking at what is the current situation, what is the current existing landscape and the current projections for the city, and got into trying to develop a scenario about what this cap would mean for growth and what those ramifications were.
And probably just really for the purposes of providing context, the REME model is a nationwide model that I think has been around for at least 25 years, probably a lot longer than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the REME model and REME was founded in the 1980s, and
Okay.
so REME releases an updated version annually following release of new data and new projections. But you're absolutely right. It's used across the country in virtually every state, across every range of government, state government, local government, to answer questions around what are the economic impacts.
And the purpose is really to provide consistent, reliable, and objective information to policymakers, such as people on city councils, people who might be in state legislatures, governors, people that are talking about it. But I just wanted, before we started getting into this economic analysis, I just wanted to highlight the fact that when somebody says REME model, that's a brand. And that's a nationwide brand, and it means a lot. And so this study and what you're about to talk about is using that model, which is used nationwide, really, for all sorts of different kinds of things.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for pointing that out. And I think sometimes I may overlook that, but you're absolutely right that this is a consistent framework, and I've always touted as a consistent framework and a credible and transparent framework. I think that's most important in doing these types of economic impact studies, is transparency in what you're doing. And REME has been dedicated to that through publishing every equation, every data assumption in terms of what that peer-reviewed framework. So you're absolutely right that this study and this partnership is based in that rigor within the economic modeling tool.
So that's an interesting phrase, housing units. What's a housing unit? Is that like an apartment? It's got 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms? Is it a mansion? Is it a house? Is it an apartment? What is it?
It's a good question. And
I can answer that.
Please, Ty. I think that's in your
Or is it
court.
perhaps not defined?
Well, a housing unit could be anything that houses anyone. I mean, that's livable. And so that could be condo, that could be rental, that could be single family, that could be multifamily units. So there's a whole gamut of different type of definitions that fall under housing unit.
Well, that's right. And given that great variability in this law that you were analyzing, is it defined, or is it just use the phrase housing units?
So, not to get too far into it, it was actually, I found some discrepancies in how they defined it, talking housing units, but using household numbers. So housing units are structures, but some of the numbers and their references went to households, which are occupied housing units. And so there was a little bit of discrepancy in some of the language. So there is a distinction there. We took in the measure itself. They provide an estimate, a last history year estimate for 2017, that we took as our starting point. So we took what this initiative came up for the 2017 starting point, just so that we were on level playing field.
Okay, and please define that estimate a little bit more. Is it in terms of number of people that are in the housing unit, or what kind of characteristics or attributes?
So I guess a household is a group of people living under the same roof within a single housing unit. So that's a household, and there is household size numbers that measure the size of household. The household size, I believe, in the city of Lakewood is about 2.27 people per housing unit as a current household size. You don't
That's
get
all I was
into
really
that.
trying to
Okay.
understand. And what was the impetus or the goal of this law that you've just described for Lakewood, which is not yet in effect? It's a prospective law.
It was a citizen-led ballot initiative. My understanding is it is not on the November ballot. May come up again as soon as November, and may be something the city council can take on. The efforts, as far as I am aware, directly within the initiative, are to address, promote growth in blighted areas, preserve open space, to allow growth to proceed in an orderly manner, preserve air and water quality, reduce crime, and alleviate pressure on infrastructure and schools. So all very worthwhile goals and aspirational goals that I think a lot of us can agree are what we want in our communities. But those are the stated goals. To the real motivation, I can't speak to. But that's what's contained within the initiative.
And do you know why 1%, or do you know why 1% versus 2%, 3%, or 5%, or some other arbitrary number?
Peter, I really don't know why they chose 1%. Maybe they're feeling like they had a opportunity to. I don't know. I just don't know where that 1% came from versus 2 or 3%.
Well, I am very skeptical of laws like this, which is probably the source of my questions, which is, what's a household? What's 1% all about? But I guess from the point of view of Lakewood, it is feeling pressure, I would assume, from growth. And this is a citizen-led initiative that didn't get on the ballot for this coming year in an attempt to control growth. And the way that the growth is to be controlled is to have a rule, have a law. And the law is going to be, our new law is going to be, will stop new housing units that are greater than 1%. And the way we'll do that, we'll just require people to prove that collectively they're meeting the 1% standard. Yeah. Is that a fair summary of what you read?
Yeah, that's right. I can't speak to the reaction. I think it is a reaction to a changing physical landscape and to growth, and people that have lived in these communities see change and want to address it in a particular manner. So, but the initiative itself actually creates an allocation process, an entirely new government structure that is yet to be determined what that costs and where that will be housed, that would oversee the delegation of these allocations prior to receiving a building permit. It also, I should say, caps, restricts housing, residential, or the people looking to develop residential housing developments of greater than 40 units. So it even has a restriction at greater than 40 units. You can go to city council to receive special approval. However, it even has an additional restriction. There are some exemptions within blighted land and college universities, but I can get into that later as far as...
Well, that's great. We are now, if this law were to pass, we'll have a new housing council or commissars or something like that.
Might be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ty, what's your take on this? We just have a few seconds because we'll talk about the findings. But what's your overall take on this new law?
Well, I think it's going to, while it's great that they're thinking like this and they're looking at the economy, I think it's going to do the opposite effect. I think it's going to stifle the progress that we've already made. Just think about this last legislative session when we had the construction defects litigation reform that was passed. Well, that was supposed to help, build the economy. It's going to take a couple years to do that.
Yeah, we'll look at that more when we come back here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for staying with us on Connect and Collaborate today. We are connecting with Peter Moore from Vital for Colorado. We're so glad to have you hosting the show with us today.
Well, thanks a lot, Tammy. We're very happy to have we have two guests today. Ty Adams is the president and CEO of the Colorado Association of REALTORS. And we also have the new director of research and policy, or policy and research, for the Common Sense Policy Roundtable. And we're talking about a report that just came out last Tuesday of this week. The official title of the report is The Economic and Fiscal Impacts of Restricting Housing Growth in the City of Lakewood. And this is really an economic analysis under the REME model, which is nationwide economic development model, of a prospective law that is a citizen-led initiative which may go into effect at the request of the City Council at some point in the future. And the Common Sense Policy Roundtable, along with the Colorado Association of Realtors and Colorado Concern and the Denver South Economic Development Partnership, I guess commissioned this report under the REME license to find out what the economic impacts are. So that's what we're talking about. And Chris, what are the primary economic impacts were this law to go into effect?
Sure. So, the direct effect is fewer residential properties being developed in the city of Lakewood. And through our estimates, that could be as much as up to about 4,000 foregone residential residential units over the next decade. So we put together two scenarios and sort of detailed what went into each of those projections, but up to about 4,000 fewer units would be the top line number. And so the cascading effects of that are less residential investment in construction and activity related to the actual building, engineering, planning that has a significant contribution to local economy, hires local workers, and then you see fewer households, and so you lose the disposable income, you lose the consumer base. And that puts pressure on ultimately having a region that is projected to see strong growth. If you are not adding enough housing units, you put significant pressure and really further pressure on the costs and the affordability of housing.
And to put it into context, 4,000, or I guess 4,100 households over the next 10 years. How large of a community is this? How many people, how many households?
So currently, the city of Lakewood is about 150,000 people and about 67,000 households. Excuse me. So this would be up to about an 18% reduction in the growth over the next 10 years.
That's what I was looking for, and that's a big number.
Sure.
And the thing, Ty, that really gets my attention is that Colorado, I guess I've been here since 1978, and I've seen prices go up and down, but the last 4 or 5 years have been astounding in terms of housing prices. And it's a good and bad thing, in the sense of, I suppose if you have a house, want to sell it, you think it's a good thing, but then you go out and try to buy a house, saying, holy cow, the price is pretty high. An 18% reduction over a decade for a place like Lakewood, what's your view of what that might do to housing costs and the availability of housing, and what are young people that are coming into the economy supposed to do?
Well, think about this. In the summer, this summer, our listings are already down by 37% statewide.
Right.
At its lowest point, we had 1.9 months of supply for the state. In the Denver area, we had 1.3 months of inventory. So if you think about the supply and demand rule, then the prices are going to rise. And that's going to push out the people, the first-time home buyers who want to purchase their first home. Well, they can't do it. So what do? They go and rent. Well, that also increases the rental prices for everyone as well. Mm-hmm. These growth initiatives, like we said, it's going to stifle the progress of the developers who, through the construction defect litigation reform this past legislative session, it takes a couple years for that to come to fruition. And we want to see that manifest itself and help Colorado grow healthy, and strengthen our economy. But we don't want to see any limitations or put barriers on people able to purchase homes.
And I now can see, I now more clearly understand the tagline for your study, building gated communities. But it sounds to me like all of Lakewood, if this law were to go into effect, becomes a kind of a gated community. in the sense that we've got ours and we're going to keep all the others out, and it really defies the laws of supply and demand, it seems to me, because normally if the demand is higher and higher, then people would build more houses or more housing units in this context. But now we're going to restrict that. Yeah, and so what happens over time?
Yeah, it's interesting. When looking into this, what we found is that there is a strong regional vision for growth established by the Denver Region Council of Governments and a really democratically established, citizen-led, comprehensive plan that lays the framework for zoning in the city of Lakewood that, through a recent housing study that further emphasized this point, lays the framework for where growth and how growth can occur without undermining the fabric and the nature of the communities and the existing residential communities. And so the city of Lakewood is unique in that it has, not unique, but is important for that growth, as it has a significant public investment, the West Rail Line, where there's a lot of employment centers, and where a lot of the anticipated growth is expected and needs to occur to ultimately reduce the amount of transportation demand on the network, getting people closer to where they live and work. And that was one of the major findings, was the extent to which already critical civil servants, critical city workers, including public administration officials and firemen, police, are in a lot of ways forced to commute into the city because of the affordability has already reached a breaking point. So this undermines that desire to sort of alleviate transportation congestion by forcing people to commute in for those jobs.
And this just jumps out at me again, and I know that both of you and Ty probably something that you've been very focused on the last couple of years. One of the major things in the Colorado legislature for the last 3 or 4 years has been to try to alleviate concerns so the builders cannot build, and I'm putting this in the negative, but I'll come back in just a second, because of a fear of litigation. And the real goal is to promote transit-oriented development, to build development around transit lines, which through that initiative would really control growth and promote public transportation. But now we're going to throw that, and that's something that's been going on for years. But now we're not going to do that. We're going to have a new law which is going to arbitrarily restrict housing, and will destroy these. Well, not really destroy that. That's probably strong, but 18% impact over years. It runs directly contrary to the entire goal of transit-oriented development in Colorado, which I thought was a good thing, and I thought was one of the major initiatives of all the governments of all the cities in the region.
Yeah, Peter, I just want to add one thing, that is it going to keep people from moving into the state? Because a lot of people are migrating from California and Florida, and when they do come here, now we have the bidding wars for the low inventory.
Right.
And that drives up the housing costs as well. One of the things that we realized this year was that people were coming to the table with maybe anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 over the asking price. Well, if you're an existing resident and you're looking to move, you don't have that type of money to compete with that. Mm-hmm. So where does that put you in the housing market?
Right. So it drives people away from the state, but it also drives, is directly contrary to many other initiatives, it just seems to me, and leads to further urban sprawl because people move farther and farther away.
You're trying to find something to afford, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We are talking today with Vital for Colorado, and we're also speaking with Ty Adams. He's the CEO of the Colorado Association of REALTORS, and Chris Brown, Policy Director for Common Sense Policy Roundtable. We're discussing concerns around gated cities that affect housing prices and availability here in Colorado. Stay with us. We'll be back with more. We're so glad to have you along with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. We are talking with Peter Moore from Vital for Colorado, and Peter, I'll let you reintroduce your guests.
Well, thanks a lot. We're talking to Ty Adams, the President and CEO of the Colorado Association of REALTORS, and we're also talking to Chris Brown, as new Director of Policy and Research for Common Sense Policy Roundtable. We're talking about a law which is not yet in effect but might go into effect in Lakewood. And this is an approach for many of the communities. And we have talked, I think, about the report that you just issued, but I really would like to sort of focus on the broader impact and what this means for the state of Colorado. It seems to me that if we're cutting the housing stock over 10 years in Lakewood by virtue of this government fiat by 18%, that it's just going to push people out of Lakewood, and it's going to create higher demands for things like water, roads, land, and all of it. So now we're creating urban sprawl again. Fair?
I think it's hard to say exactly where those households will go, but that generally was our finding, is that the plan, the areas where growth is zoned for and within the city's existing plans accommodates growth within employment centers, along transit lines. And so to the extent that growth now has to be dispersed, absolutely on a per unit cost, you're driving farther. The energy intensity of homes as they get bigger and use more and require more infrastructure to build out to them certainly could increase, absolutely.
And Ty, this seems to have a direct impact. This seems to have a direct relationship to something that you raised about the construction defect law. What's your view on that?
Well, it's going to limit growth. It's going to create barriers. It's going to impede the progress that's already been made with that new reform. We just feel like it's going to impact the future opportunities for Colorado. And we talk about strengthening our communities. What about the businesses that want to move here as well, that help our commercial sector, that create jobs for our economy?
Right. It just seems to me that this initiative is contrary to most of the urban planning ideas that I think have been prevalent in Colorado, at least in the last 5 years. And it seems like most of the communities, the Colorado legislature, the Denver Chamber, the Aurora Chamber, and various other organizations have been in line, and this has taken a dramatic left turn. That's my overall take on that. I don't know if I'm simplifying it too much, but it's just now jumping out to me from your comments.
That seems to be it undoubtedly is a completely different take on how to plan and sustainable growth within urban communities that require, as you pointed out, and these plans have pointed out, require transit-oriented development, require walkability, require better livability within these urban centers. And one of the interesting things is you look at permit history and the development. It's spiked, it's shot up, come down over the last couple of years, because that's the nature of how development occurs. You build larger units, you build out, and so this totally undermines that ability to build larger multifamily units that really gets to the affordability issues with income inequality that are critical to maintain that affordability, which, as Ty, you pointed out, is important for businesses as they look to expand and relocate, and the cost of your workforce, the labor force, is a critical element, and the cost of living related to housing is a large piece of that. And so this adds to that the already existing issue the region faces.
Do you have a sense of what the partnership that has, I guess, commissioned this study plans to do with the study in the next 3 months, 6 months?
Well, I should say the partnership, we meet monthly and we talk about these issues, and we put together a pretty aggressive take on some of the most critical issues as they affect, again, Colorado citizens, the broader economy. I can talk a little bit about what we expect to do without giving away too much, but largely related to education and the state's existing education and K-12 education, and put that as an issue as it relates to the overall economy and economic growth for the state. We'll look at some state budget issues, likely related to para. We'll look at some energy issues and energy development issues that have just been raised recently again, and what that means for economic growth. And here we're talking about the affordability of housing, and we'll look at what this means hopefully for the affordability of energy and the development of energy. So within the state, so there's a pretty aggressive next couple months that I know will be busy.
And Ty, for you, what are the 3 or 4 initiatives, or 2 to 3 initiatives for your group that you're focusing on? Because the affordability of housing seems to be almost number one. It's gotten out of control. And I'm not sure that my 22-year-old, who has pretty good housing, he's just down the hall from me right now, but he is in the middle of college and his studies, and he's worried about the cost of housing. And it's probably his primary anxiety, I suppose, about graduating, getting a job, but how to get a place in American society.
Well, you're right. Affordability has been our number one issue that we've been talking about, and some of the other things we've been talking about as a group is like water, utilities. We even talked about marijuana studies that we want to dive into to see how that's impacting housing in Colorado now. All those type of things. So being a part of this group is a true pleasure, because we get to think with like-minded groups again that want to strengthen our communities and make sure that we are doing what's best for the leaders in the business communities, give them information, but also the policymakers. So that way, when they do make critical decisions down at the Capitol, they're making the right decisions for all constituents of Colorado, not just a specific area.
And I think in terms of having information, I'm hopeful, I suppose, that the decision makers, since it's not in the ballot this election, are actually the Lakewood City Council. Is that correct?
My understanding is that the Lakewood City Council is the organization, is the body that would be able to enact this potentially without it going to a ballot to a citizen vote.
And the other pathway is that I suppose, and this is something which we're focusing now on Lakewood, but there have been some other initiatives in other cities, have there?
Well, there is a pending statewide effort, I believe, that is possibly collecting signatures currently and may appear on next year's ballot, that would allow this to occur and give the ability for cities across the state to impose a similar 1% restriction. And we talked here that in this example, the displaced growth can possibly be accommodated, although maybe at a higher cost elsewhere. But if this sort of effort to restrict growth beyond what the demand looks to be, the projected demand looks to be on a regional basis, the economic consequences would be far more significant than we've outlined today, and have real serious consequences for the employment growth, business growth, investment throughout the region.
Well, to me, I guess restricting the housing stock by up to 18% over 10 years in one community obviously will move growth to other communities. If these kinds of approaches were adopted in all communities, then it would drive growth to the places where there aren't cities or outside the city of Colorado. And it just seems to me that this whole approach is completely contrary to the regional urban planning that I think this whole region's been trying to work together on pretty successfully, I think, for as long as I've been here. Why don't you plug your organization a little bit and the website, and where can one go to find out more about the Realtors?
Well, like I said, we're the Colorado Association of Realtors. We're part of a three-way agreement with the local and national Association of Realtors. Our main goals is to protect private property rights and home ownership. We're huge advocates in that arena. We do this by political advocacy, legal risk information, and then also through research. Being part of coalitions like this is just a true pleasure. And like I said, we want to make sure that everyone, including our members, are educated about what's going on. They have the information, so that way they can make great decisions for Colorado.
And Chris, where can one find your study that you just published last Tuesday?
Sure, you can go to our website, commonsenspolicyroundtable.com, and we have additional information on the full study. The two-pager talks about the partnership that we work with Colorado Association of Realtors, Colorado Concern, and Denver South Economic Development Partnership on these in-depth sort of investigative studies as policy relates to the overall economy.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Peter Moore from Vital for Colorado, and to you, Chris Brown, and also to Ty Adams. We really appreciate you being on the show today and giving us so much great information.
Thanks a lot, Tammy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.